Okay, so I'm trying this again this time. Hopefully, I won't be interrupted. Talking about the Eaters of Light. And, I'm sorry, I feel like I open every one of these videos at this point with an apology for not doing more scripted content. But, I promise, uh, I did not mean for this to be the third unscripted video in a row. The, with last week's episode and the Spider Man speculation thing. That was just sort of an impromptu occurrence, and I just wanted to get my thoughts on this episode down as quick as possible. I'm actually outsourcing the editing for the next scripted video, so that might take a little bit longer, but it's probably gonna look better than whatever I was going to do. Maybe, I don't know. Let's see what happens. But yeah, the Eaters of Light. This was written by Rona Munro, I think is her name, or I think that's it. And it's the first episode in the whole modern Doctor Who series to be written by a holdover from the classic series. They actually wrote the final episode of the classic show, which was Survival. I liked Survival quite a bit. I don't really remember that much about it. It's been a year or two since I sat down and watched it in full. But I remember liking it a lot. And this episode I thought was pretty okay, which was, nothing too impressive, but it was a relief after the last 2 weeks of being really disappointed, and even to the point of downright, like, incredulous at the Empress of Mars. This was just a nice, sort of simple story that I had a couple issues with, but is mostly just carried by a really decent central theme. So this is the Doctor and Bill and Nardole. They go to second century, I think they said it was, Scotland, where there's this creature that's been it like completely deprives a person of sunlight, and because of this weird time differential thing, it kills them. So it's like a couple of seconds for them is like they've experienced no sunlight for several months or years even. And I'm a bit fuzzy on the mechanics of that, and really the whole time thing in this episode. I feel like maybe I need to watch the episode one more time before I really get it. I've watched it twice. That it's one thing of the episode that I feel is there, but that I'm just not completely comprehending. But anyway, so this creature's there, and there's a bunch of Roman soldiers and a bunch of Scottish barbarians, and I like that it's not the typical trying to get both sides to see the good in each other and reach a compromise and it gets ruined like we had last week that I was really complaining about being a real trite Doctor Who plot. Them coming together is of course part of it, but the point of the story is about growing up, and I think this episode works a lot better on a second viewing once you've really clued into that theme. It was about 2/3 of the way through the episode before it really clicked with me that the whole story is about how both sides of this conflict are children, and the inherent tragedy of the fact that, like, the oldest one among them is 18 years old, and that these are two groups of kids that have been left behind to basically murder each other because of this war that neither of them truly understands the point of. And it gets to the point where their first reaction to seeing anyone is to try and kill them or assume that they're about to be killed. And that's something that is real sad. And this episode is paced like a classic episode. I don't want to get any Classic Who fans on my case when I say that, but I've not seen a single Classic Who story that didn't feel really slow in some places. that's full of padding, and that's just sort of to do with the format of the show. And this episode feels real slow and atmospheric, but once once like you become once it becomes clear that this isn't a fun romp episode, it's sort of a sit with a tragedy of the past episode. That becomes a strength rather than a weakness. And like I was saying, I like how because the reason for the Light Eater is that the Scottish kids sort of unleashed it to kill the Romans, and did that, and their plan was the beast will kill the Romans, and the Romans will wound the beast enough that it'll just die off on its own. And of course, that doesn't end up happening. But it's sort of like they are children and they are victims, but as the Doctor keeps telling them, this is their fight, they have to grow up. And the reason it's their fight is because they unleashed this thing. It's their responsibility. And in order to truly grow up, they have to stop being victims and take on this monster that they let loose on the world. And I really like how the episode ends, or at least how their part of the episode ends, because there is a an epilogue of sorts with Missy that we'll get to, but uh, the Doctor tries to like say that he'll sit down because they lure the beast back into the gate where it came out of, and because of the time differential thing, someone has to stay with the beast basically until the end of time, because if it ever gets out, it's going to keep eating light until it eventually goes out and eats the sun and eats every star and everything's dead. And so the Doctor offers to like be the gatekeeper and sit down with it. But the Carr, who is the main Scottish girl who let out the beast, she decides to stay, and a bunch of the Scottish barbarians and a bunch of the Romans, including the main Roman, the 18-year-old, decide to join her, and that's them growing up to the point that they have now outgrown the need to listen to the Doctor, and they've really become their own people. Like, he's pushed them to the point where they don't need him. And they sort of understand that they've come to understand their own responsibility and how to handle it better than he does. And so I really felt like that was a really well handled sort of character growth thing. And again, I'm not entirely sure if it makes sense that they go into the gate and they're able to then basically keep the creatures at bay for all eternity. Because the way that the Doctor describes the process in that same scene, that seems like the exact opposite of what should happen. But I feel like, again, maybe I'm just missing something. But I don't know, I'm willing to let that go just because of how well I feel that like caps off the theme of the episode. And then we get to Missy, who this sort of ties in with her, because it might feel a bit obtrusive that this episode ends and then we just sort of spend 5 minutes with Missy in the TARDIS. Like, she's sort of working the TARDIS now. She can't ever get out of it, so it's still sort of like a prison. But we've essentially got exactly what the Doctor described as their possible relationship coming off of the end of Series 3, before the Master dies there, where the 10th Doctor basically says, I'll keep him in the TARDIS, I'll make sure he's good or whatever, he'll basically be like a prisoner. And that's exactly what we have here. And I'm sort of glad, because I've always wondered what that would have looked like, and now we're getting it, only like 10 years later. So, yeah, I think it's shaping up to be real interesting. Because, What this series seems to be doing that I really gave Series 9 a lot of kudos for is that its series arc isn't trying to be like a plot thing or a mystery box. It's trying to be about character, and it sets it up to make you think that it's a mystery box and then pulls the rug out from under you. That's not what it is at all. And that's sort of what Series 9 did, and I really liked how that ended up, where for most of that series, up until Hellbent, you think it's okay, the arc of the series is the hybrid, and what is the hybrid, and how are they going to stop this thing? And it only becomes clear in, like, the final half of the last episode of Series 9 that, oh, that's not what this series has been about at all. This has been about the Doctor and Clara together becoming the hybrid symbolically. So what you thought was a mystery box, and what a lot of people came off of that series still thinking, like I know a lot of people like Mr. TARDIS and Stu Bagfull came off of Series 9 treating the hybrid like it was a loose thread, like it was something that Moffat was sort of saving for next series that he had done, as he had done so many times. That's not the point. The point is that, oh, what you thought was a plot thing was instead a character thing. And retroactively, Series 9, the arc is the Doctor and Clara's character arc. Here, I feel like we're doing the same thing, where the arc of Series 10 isn't what is X or who's the mystery person pulling the strings, connecting all these episodes. No, it's, can Missy change? Is it possible that maybe the Doctor and her can actually become friends again? And I'm really interested to see where this goes, because we only have 2 episodes left, I think, and there's 3 possible options. One of which is Missy turns out to have been faking it the whole time, and I like that this episode ends with acknowledging that, with the Doctor saying, maybe the Doctor and her admitting, maybe she is faking it, and that would actually be less scary than the alternative, which is that maybe she genuinely is grasping the universe differently and is feeling things differently and is becoming a more complete person. And I like that the two of them are scared of that possibility because they don't know what to do with it. But yeah, the way I see it, option 1, she's faking it, and we're back to status quo by the end of the series, where she's gone or she's missing or whatever, and she's still evil. Or option 2, she has a full redemption and she truly gets to become a complete person, and then she dies. I'm thinking we might be building up to another heroic sacrifice type thing. Those two seem like the most likely options. What I'm hoping instead is the third option, which is that we have a complete status quo shift by the end of the series, and Missy's just an ally. Missy gets to grow up, like the characters in this episode got to grow up, and become a decent person, and that would be the bravest thing that this show ever did, and or at least the bravest thing that Moffat ever did is completely upend what has been a status quo to this show for decades, and that is the Master is the villain. The Master is the bad guy. He, she, they are the Moriarty to the Doctor Sherlock, and that's just their relationship. No matter how hard they try, they can't grow past that. Like, we've had that, and I find it great that the writer of Survival wrote those scenes, because Survival ends the classic series on this note of the Doctor trying to appeal to the Master's better nature, and yet over the course of that episode, the Master has completely become an animal, and I feel like that's symbolic of the master is incapable of growing up and is incapable of becoming the better person. And I like that with that same writer, years and years and years later, we are now at this point where maybe that's not necessarily the case. Maybe we are at a point where where the only thing we can do with this character at this point is to let them grow out of their role, let them stop being this creature that's not really a person and only knows how to be this destructive force of nature, and maybe let them change and become more human. And I would really like if series 10 sort of ends and it is the antithesis of survival in that sense. I feel like that would be a brilliant way to handle Moffat's last series, where that would probably be the biggest impact that Moffat ever left on this show. Forget bringing the Time Lords back; they were going to come back eventually anyway. They hadn't been gone for that long relative to the show's lifespan. Having the Master end a series as a decent person, or even just a person who is able to see outside of themselves, would be the most revolutionary move I think Moffat is capable of. And I don't know. I really hope that this arc pans out. I'm interested to see how John Sims' Master factors into things. But I don't know. This is great to me. Like, I like the episode as a whole, but the Missy stuff for a series that I feel like has up until now had me sort of iffy on how I felt about how she's been utilized. That is the most fascinating thing in this episode is Missy, and especially Missy relative to the last time that this writer wrote The Master, and thinking about it on that level. And so, I don't know. I liked it. And I'm really interested to see where this goes. At the moment, the next two episodes I think are what's going to make or break this series. Where I feel like stuff like Thin Ice and Extremis, and to a less and the Pyramid at the End of the World, and to a lesser extent Smile and the pilot. I think those episodes are mostly going to hold up. But and this one I think is going to hold up. But how the Missy stuff ends and just the overall quality of those two episodes is going to color my overall view of this series a lot, because it's real split down the middle right now. We've had a couple real stinkers, and we've had a few that I've really, really liked. I'm holding out for this show for Moffat's era to end on a real good note. And I don't know. That's all I got to say for this episode. Let's see how it goes.